Good day, everyone, and welcome to the SEC-GECA webinar. This webinar is a momentous occasion that sees the Singapore Environment Council and Good Environmental Choice Australia come together for the first time since we signed the Memorandum of Understanding in 2022. Today brings together knowledgeable and experienced individuals from both Singapore and Australia for a presentation and discussion on the merits of eco-labels. To kick things off, we'd like to invite Singapore Environment Council Chairman, Ms. Isabella Loh, to detail how the SEC-GECA MOU can contribute to each country's climate goals. Chairman, please.
Okay, I'm unmuted. Apologies. Good morning to everyone in Singapore, and a very good afternoon also for our partners and friends in Australia. And I'm very happy to say that about 300 of you have signed up from all over the world, different time zones, and as far away as America as well as Ecuador. Thank you for joining us at this time. And I'd like to express my sincere thanks for you all giving the time today. Long day. I'd also like to welcome our distinguished moderator, Ms. Kate Harris, the Secretariat from our Global Eco-Labeling Network. Thank you. Special guest, Mr. Jorge Laguna Celis, Head of the One Planet Network at the United Nations Environmental Program, UNEP. Our speakers and panelists, Ms. Michelle Harris, CEO of GECA, Ms. Catherine Caldwell, Director of the Commonwealth Sustainable Procurement Advocacy and Resource Centre, CSPARC, Environmental Protection Department Division, Australian Government. Ms. Karina Clark, Business Development Manager of Planex, GECA licensee. Ms. Jen Teo, Executive Director of Singapore Environment Council. Ms. Koh Kai Chien, Public Sector Sustainability Office of Ministry of Sustainability and Environment of Singapore. Mr. Jester Cruz, Senior Regional Manager for Corporate Products, Epson Southeast Asia, and an SEC licensee. Thank you very much for coming in to do this. Now, today's webinar is really a joint effort between the Singapore Environment Council and the Good Environmental Choice Australia, otherwise GECA, is really rooted in one of the 17 MOUs that was signed between our two esteemed countries. The MOU then was signed on 23rd of October 2022 as part of the Singapore-Australian Green Economy Agreement, otherwise known as the GEA. So I'm really happy to say that the GEA had progressed quite a bit, and so this is really a report out on some of the progress of what we are doing. The GEA aims to support both our nation's economic, trade, investments, and climate change policy objectives. The GEA has opened many doors for both countries to establish new platforms and to explore innovative ways to connect businesses as well as consumers in emerging green economy, driving new green growth and, of course, job creation. So today's webinar, we're going to understand the importance of eco-labels and how they are used in public procurement. It was really designed to unite both GECA and SEC even closer to the complex arena of sustainable public procurement. So over the next hour and a half, we will share with you and discuss with you the benefits of eco-label and how they drive the green economy, and how public sector green procurement is set to drive the adoption of more eco-labels. Information on the different types of eco-labels and the criteria used to earn an eco-label and the benefits of choosing the products from the eco-labels, and how eco-labels can then be used to trade between countries, and that is through the GECA and the SEC MOU. So again, without further ado, we shall now talk again about this MOU that will enable the collaboration of two key areas between SEC and GECA. Firstly, it will harmonize the standards that are creating opportunities for both sides to cross-trade that meet green procurement objectives, thereby driving the uptake of the eco-label products. Secondly, it will empower us to create a roadmap to help achieve both of our countries' overall climate goals. The GEA, again, has strong focus on climatic-related activities, and both GECA and the SEC are exploring ways in which we can add GHG emission criteria to these eco-labels to align again to our government's climate goals. So, the next 12 to 18 months, we have committed to undertake research on GHG emissions criteria, focusing on one standard that will impact more commercial companies, such as building and construction, and as well as equipment. Our collaboration is set to strengthen partnerships which will lead to tangible benefits for businesses and consumers, and of course, ultimately drive sustainable public procurement to contribute towards the transition into net zero emission economies for both Singapore and Australia. And with that, please welcome my counterpart, Ms. Michelle Thomas, CEO of Good Environment Choice Australia. And as well as I must send this back to Kate Harris as well as the moderator for the next segment of this webinar. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks, Isabella. Thank you very much. And just as is custom here in Australia, and in the spirit of reconciliation, we like to acknowledge and recognise the traditional custodians throughout Australia and on the land on which we meet today. For me, I am coming to you from the Gurungai and Darug People's Land, and I'd like to pay my respects to elders both past, present, and extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. Isabella, thank you very much for that wonderful opening. I think you've really covered all of the points and the benefits of such a wonderful working relationship that we have now been able to forge. And we thank the federal government for facilitating and giving us this push for such a fantastic progression and a way to create those pathways for more sustainable progression for licensees. GECA is a not-for-profit organisation. We're a small not-for-profit organisation, and as such, we have a very small team. So although we are talking about harmonisation and we're talking about empowering, creating roadmaps and working together, this also supports GECA's objectives in progression and ensuring that we have real key and consistent standards globally. Climate problems are not an Australian problem. They're not a Singaporean problem. They're a global problem. We need to work together to combat these issues and ensure that harmonisation. Harmonisation, we ask, why do we have harmonisation? It's really key to have that consistency and to have those clear benchmarks and those clear standards that are set from country to country that can be crossed from country to country. I don't want to go into too much. Isabella has very much covered the objectives for today's webinar. We have some really fantastic speakers today. So I'd just like to thank everybody for joining. We have a fantastic crowd. I'm really excited to see so many of you having registered and joined us today. So I would like to thank you, as Isabella said, from all around the globe. It's really fantastic that we're able to see you here and to engage with you on how eco-labels can work in public procurement and how we can address such important issues that we need to work through now. Thanks. I will now hand over to Kate Harris. As Isabella said, Kate Harris is the moderator for today's session. She's also the Secretariat for GEN, and she's also the ex-CEO of GECA. So she is super familiar in this area, and we are really lucky to have her here to moderate the session. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Michelle, and a real pleasure to be here, and something very dear to my heart, Jen and GECA, and of course the Singapore initiatives as well. Isabella and Jen and I have been working for quite a while in this space, and it's so fantastic to see things come to fruition. I'd also like to acknowledge I'm on the Ngunnawal land today, and acknowledge our elders past, present and emerging, and thank them for the incredible work of sustainability and caring for people and planet that we're really all here to do, to acknowledge today too. I'm going to speak briefly first. I'm just going to pull up some slides. I'm going to talk to them fairly quickly, but really this is just an opportunity to give some context for you all around Jen, and we're very proud of all of our members and exemplary ones such as GECA and Singapore as well. Thrilled that they're here, and really today is a celebration of very much what Jen is about, which is about mutual recognition, harmonisation, and as Michelle well put, a global challenge. So we do indeed need all of us. So who is Jen? We are a not-for-profit organisation from 1994, and we bring together those critical response of the ISO 14024 Type 1 eco-label, and we have checks and balances around that to make sure they are the most credible standing eco-labels. We know there's a lot of confusion out in the market around what an eco-label is, and our voice and advocacy for that, working with governments, working with intergovernmental organisations, some of course who are here today, are critical in our shared response to support and drive real solutions for sustainability. A little bit about the ISO 14024, I may be talking to the converted, but the excellence of the eco-label, it is voluntary. It is not minimum compliance. It needs to be over and above. And so you'll hear from some of the licensees as well, who are really thought leaders in commitment to doing the right thing. It is a life cycle based approach. It's not just one singular aspect. We don't have time to do just climate change or just biodiversity. We have to find that way of doing the best we can for all things people and planet in a parallel manner. And that is what the ISO 14024 does. Transparency, truth and trust very much are components of the eco-label as well. And transparency is a key requirement of our Gen members so that everyone knows what good looks like. Everyone continue to aim and strive for this. So reflecting multiple criteria and making sure that there is real benefit to people and planet. It is within the suite of eco-labels. Some of you know I sit on the Australian Environmental Committee and also the global one for the revision of this suite. We've just finished the ISO 14020 revision. So ISO 14021 self-directed claims, which we are looking forward to tightening up, particularly in the name of avoiding greenwash, something I know the Australian government does a particularly standout global job on. And so we're looking forward to tightening that up. And of course, there's also the ISO 14025s, the EPDs and life cycle analysis that does also work in many ways in partnership with eco-labels in order for us to make data-driven decision-making. One thing just to outline some of the comparisons, if you're not familiar, is that in terms of data, the ISO 14025 and lifecycle analysis does give a lot of data, but it does make it hard to make critical decision makings around what is good, what is best practice, and how do you know unless you really are in that full lifecycle analysis technical expertise. Whereas the ISO 14024 is a mark that says for the benefit of procurement and the ease of decision making, but also ensuring truth, trust and transparency, this mark shows that it's been checked, that it is against a standard, that it is about making a difference against all the criteria that matters most. And it's also not about shifting burden in sustainability. So doing good to one thing but harming another is not okay in the ISO 14024 space. So eco-labels in my language are all about They're very complex. Anyone who knows and works in this space, it looks like a simple eco-label, but what sits behind it in regards to the rigor and the expertise, the credibility, the verification process is really critical. And that's why our partners, to support us in understanding how do we shift on a whole system level, is incredibly valuable. In terms of sustainable procurement, and Isabella spoke to this as well as Michelle, we really are coming at a time where we need the groundswell of sustainable public procurement. And we know that as the need for decision-making around things like GHG, biodiversity, and all of the complexity of holding all of those things at once needs an important tool and vehicle to establish procurement decisions. And so we're really thrilled to have Catherine here today as well to talk about that. It is, in a sense, a one-stop shop in order to provide the best guidance in any given time. And we've seen time and time again at the Global Eco-Labelling Network, fantastic economic benefits as well as environmental benefits through eco-labels working in partnership with public procurement. And many of our members have fantastic data on that, including the two we're going to hear from today. So a quick reminder, we are about low carbon and circularity. We're about everything that it touches for products and services across the supply chain. So it can't just be about carbon. And increasingly what we're also seeing is the importance of human health and the care of manufacturers, the care of end users, and government's role in that too, in terms of public procurement, and a sense of civil society responsibility is also critical as well. We know from mapping the ISO 14024s that just about every sustainable development goal is touched on by having a certified product. And so I encourage you to look at a standard on one of the websites and actually ask yourself, how does this touch the lives of many in a global context? And of course, the mutual recognition and harmonization approach is so important too. And our full members who've gone through the Genesis process, such as SEC and GECA, that we're very proud of, go through a rigorous process to assess and ensure that credibility. And in doing so, open up the doors for that harmonization, for regional cooperation, which has such benefits that we're going to hear today as well. So these are just some of the opportunities in terms of what that looks like, who uses these tools. We know in an Australian and Singapore context that built environment sector and public procurement increasingly are reliant on these tools. And of course, these are some of just the few benefits that users and procurers can benefit from the use of eco-labels. So Australia in particular, you'll see there some of the ways that they're referenced, and you'll hear more about that, I'm sure. But thinking about our whole ecosystem of partners and how really it does make a difference into real change. And we also see some fantastic results from Singapore Environment Council as well. The need to quantify, to provide data, to show that we're actually creating real change is really what we're on the cusp of doing. And we welcome that in partnership as well. So it's not all about me today, but I did want to give that context for you all in regards to the eco-labels. Wonderful full members here today. And now we'll move more into our speakers and in depth, and we'll then move into the panel. So next I would like to introduce the wonderful Mr. Jorge Laguna Celis, who's from UN Environment, One Planet Network, the 10YFP, and they are indeed affiliate members of ours, but true partners for many years. And Jen wouldn't be in the position that we are without UN Environment and One Planet. We were thrilled to work with them on developing eco-labelling training and taking that out into the world over the next few years as well, to grow not only our community, but also capability. We appreciate it's very early in the morning for Jorge, but I'm really thrilled that you've come along and we're very honored. So welcome, over to you, Jorge.
Thank you very much, Kate, and thank you to all colleagues that have invited me and through me, the One Planet Network, to participate in this important event. At the outset, what I want to first express is how delighted we are to celebrate this Memorandum of Understanding, this MOU, this step forward in partnership and collaboration between GECA and the Singapore Environmental Council. What you are doing here today, the discussion that we're having today, it's an important step in building a better understanding and an increased harmonization of various standards, practices, activities, and tools that will help us, one, create I would say, a simplified baseline in a specific region on how to implement good sustainable procurement practices. It is also there to help governments help ease the transition towards achieving their climate objectives. And it's also there to help businesses make better case to challenge the traditional money, the traditional understanding of just the value for money proposition in traditional procurement practices, in established procurement practice. I'm also very pleased, Kate, that we are in this opportunity, and I am hearing you speak because your organization has been a leading partner, a driving force of the UNEP's Sustainable Public Procurement Program that we support under the One Planet Network. The work that you have done, particularly in developing the strategic plan for sustainable public procurement back in 2020, but also in helping us build a strong case for sustainable public procurement by strengthening the monitoring of implementation, by developing the methodologies that will help us make the global case that sustainable public procurement can be an extremely powerful tool, not only to achieve purely environmental goals, but truly sustainable development goals are key. The challenges, we all know them, are quite harrowing. Just the latest figures that I had the opportunity to see from UNCTAD point that the world will require between 1.5 to 2.5 trillion annually to develop and to meet the infrastructure needs of developing countries. We are seeing all over the world the recovery plans from COVID that they hinge heavily and depend heavily on the development of infrastructure. Meeting those demands in a way that is environmentally sustainable, socially sustainable, by thinking how can nature-based solutions and green procurement play a critical role, it is therefore an important opportunity. The world requires, as a matter of fact, to accelerate the shift to sustainable consumption and production in all countries. This is an area in which all countries have to do better. This is why it is important that the efforts that you are going to be implemented as part of this MOU contribute to the implementation of the global strategy on sustainable consumption and production, which was recently developed by member states with the support of the 10-year framework of programs on sustainable consumption and production, which provides the intergovernmental anchor to the work that the One Planet Network does, and that takes into account as well new areas. How can we use sustainable public procurement to change behaviors? How can we use sustainable public procurement to promote better lifestyles? How can we use sustainable public procurement and using something that it has been identified already, as a matter of fact, in the work of your work, Kate, and a number of the publications that had been done in the interest groups of the Sustainable Public Procurement Program of the One Planet Network. How can we use digitalization to close gaps that are there that we have not foreseen in terms of measurement, in terms of product development, in terms of the way in which proposals are assessed or in which bids are designed? How can we use really the transformational impact that digitalization can have in our sustainable procurement practices and in its monitoring? One word and last two words on the importance of developing emission standards on green labeled products to support sustainable public procurement. As we all know, there is a need in strengthening integrity of eco-labels. There are a number of hundreds of eco-labels existing in the marketplace, and this is one of the most important challenges that we are seeing that is facing industry, but it's also facing consumers, which are, as a matter of fact, tired of this of this multiplication, but also they are losing faith in these eco-labels because of the phenomenon of greenwashing. We are convinced that type 1 eco-labels are the most trusted and reliable. They help us determine environmental performance of a product or a service and evaluate something that you mentioned, Kate, which is the entire life cycle of a product. But greater harmonization is required in this regard, and UNEP has been calling for greater harmonization of type 1 eco-labels through, in particular, our consumer information program, which works as a partner of the Sustainable Public Procurement Program, both working hand in hand, right hand informing consumers, left hands guiding the most important global consumers, which are, as a matter of fact, the governments, right? So eco-labels can provide, as a matter of fact, a competitive advantage. Understanding their implications, understanding the connections that they have, these have in sustainable public procurement practices are key. I will really end my intervention here by saying how much I am eager to hearing from all the experts that are going to be participating in this session, saying how much it is important that, of course, the organizations that are present here and organizing this important event are members of the One Planet Network Sustainable Public Procurement Program, but perhaps a few of you are not yet aware of what the program is doing or the tools and resources that are available there. The work that you are doing here can help organizations in the Global South, in Latin America, in Asia Pacific, in Africa, increase and improve their standards, avoid, I would say, mistakes that have been made, learn from experience, and therefore it is really important that the practices that you will be developing and implementing in the context of this important MOU feed into global efforts, feed into global reporting efforts as well with regards to the SDG 12.7, which has been one of the major achievements to create that reporting methodology. Many of you have played a role and played part helping your governments raise the standards, of course, as has been already mentioned. So we invite you to join the One Planet Network. It's very simple, oneplanetnetwork.org. That's the website. I'll put it there. From there, you navigate to Sustainable Public Procurement. You will find a number of resources available for your use, but you can also see the work that's being done on Sustainable Consumer Information Program, Sustainable Lifestyles and Education, buildings and construction work, which will be very relevant to the work that you are going to be doing here in bringing circularity to the buildings and construction and also materials sector, equipment that you will be also addressing. So we stand ready to support you. We congratulate you on this important opportunity, and I look forward to this engaging event.
Many thanks, Jorge. And look, I'd just like to thank One Planet for all their contribution and efforts as well. And I do encourage you, if you don't know the website, to go and have a look, because there are so many tools and stories and sharing about what people are doing globally that we can all learn from. It is that collective movement that is so exciting. And so I know that I love going on and reading as well as sharing what Jen's doing. And Jorge, I'd also just like to acknowledge the amount of work you are doing and highlighting it around that global response. So part of the eco-labeling training, but beyond, the importance of offering this. It is a global problem, it's a global solution as well. So how do we keep sharing and connecting? And this is such a good example of that today. So thanks again, Jorge. So now we're going to move on to Ms. Ko Chakwan. And really thrilled to have her join. This is where we're starting to get into the government context to learn more. So Ms. Ko is from the Public Sector Sustainability Office at Ministry for Sustainability and Environment, and involved in formulating and implementing the policies. So this is where the rubber hits the road, and she's going to share some of her experiences. So a big welcome, Ms. Ko, over to you.
Hi, thanks, Kate. Just give me some time to load up the slides. Okay, I hope you can see my screen. Yeah, so good morning and afternoon to everyone, depending on where you're dialing in from. I'm Kai Qian from the Public Sector Sustainability Office in the Ministry of Sustainability and Environment in Singapore. I'm honored to be here today to share about how Singapore government approaches green public procurement. So just a quick overview, right? For those who are unfamiliar with this, green public procurement, or GPP, is a process where governments include environmental sustainability considerations when selecting solutions and suppliers. And as a key buyer of goods and services, governments can lead demand for greener solutions and influence the industry to adopt sustainability practices. And in Singapore, we have adopted a green procurement since 2007, introducing requirements for selected goods and services. And we intend to build on these existing requirements and raise the bar. And most recently, we announced our plan for all government tenders to incorporate environmental sustainability considerations in the tender evaluation process. So starting from 2024, for large construction and ICT tenders, besides pre-qualifying their products on environmental standards, we will also consider the sustainability practices of governments of the company that we buy from. And how do we assess environmental sustainability? We do this in various ways, either by using detailed parameters, specific standards, or as we shared earlier, to eco-labels and certifications. And in deciding which tool to use, there are various considerations. So for example, we'll first look at whether there are existing standards, labels, or certifications for the product category. And if so, are there sufficient local products that meet the standard or carry the label or certification? And of course, a big key consideration is the compliance cost to suppliers and the additional cost to our government procurement. Here are some examples of how we assess the environmental sustainability of green solutions. So for example, we mentioned that we can specify parameters. So we have done so for vehicles, where we specified that they must be clean energy vehicles with zero tailpipe emissions. And we also recognize labeling or certification schemes such as by SEC, Singapore Green Building Council, and the National Environmental Agency of Singapore. Apart from that, we can also recognize green practices and assess our suppliers. So in past tenders, we have piloted this approach where we recognize suppliers that they are able to demonstrate that they have adopted standards such as the ISO 14001. Yeah, so this is just a quick overview of how we approach green procurement in Singapore. Happy to take questions later on during the panel discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Very informative and really useful to have a snapshot of what's actually happening on the ground. And now a little bit closer to home, we'll go to Ngunnawal country, Catherine Caldwell, who's on the same First Nations land as me today. So a big welcome to Catherine. So Catherine's the key member of the Australian Government's Environment Protection Division and doing a lot in regards to the Commonwealth Sustainable Procurement Advocacy, has worked in climate as well, so knows the importance of why we do this as well. So a big welcome to Catherine to hear more around the Australian narrative.
Thanks, Kate. Before jumping into eco-labels and how we use them, I'd like to give a bit of an overview of how environmental sustainability is applied in our public procurements. So the Commonwealth Procurement Rules are the foundation of the Australian Government's procurement framework, and Australian government entities must adhere to these rules in all of their procurements. And those rules are based on that core principle of achieving value for money. But the Australian government recognises that price is not the sole factor in achieving value for money. And government officials must consider both the financial and the non-financial impacts of a procurement. And those non-financial impacts include environmental sustainability and whole of life costs, and they are actually called out in the Commonwealth Procurement Rules. So key environmental sustainability considerations, climate change impacts, environmental impacts, use of recycled products and energy efficiency. And this reflects the Australian government's commitments to net zero by 2050, moving to a circular economy by 2030 and the national waste policy. So when going to market, procuring entities may prepare, adopt, or apply technical specifications to promote, for example, the conservation of natural resources or protect the environment. And evaluation criteria set out in the tender documentation may include environmental characteristics. So eco-labels can be used by suppliers and tenderers to demonstrate the environmental credentials of their products or services against these specifications and criteria. So for example, an approach to market may have criteria for products to have a minimum of 25% recycled content, might require them to minimize use of hazardous chemicals, and to be recyclable at end of life. So an eco-label such as GECA's Furniture and Fittings Level B could be used by tenderers to demonstrate how their products have been certified against these attributes requested in the criteria. So from the government officials' perspective, when assessing tender responses, they need to undertake due diligence and they need to be assured that a tenderer's claims about their product or service are substantiated. So greenwashing is equally a concern in public procurement as it is for consumer purchases. And as a supplier, it is important to provide details about the eco-label, not just simply stating that your product or service is certified under an eco-label. In your tender responses, you could also provide information on the certification process. So is it third-party verified? What criteria is used? And be clear about what the certification covers. Does it apply to the whole product or only components of that product? So any supporting evidence that you can provide will be useful for the government officials in their tender evaluations. So in summary, eco-labels can provide transparency and credibility to a supplier's environmental claims. By applying rigorous certification processes, eco-labels can provide evidence of the environmental credentials of a product or service. And then in turn, this evidence can be used to support government procurement decision makers. Ultimately, this is leading to stronger environmental outcomes, facilitating that shift to sustainable consumption and production. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Catherine, and useful to understand, on the other side, what it looks like and how to navigate and the importance of value for money and beyond in some of these opportunities. So we're now going to move more to panel and direct questions to dear speakers here today. For those who are an audience, please feel free to start thinking about some questions. I'll invite the panel to put on their cameras and we'll start diving right in. I've got a few questions to start and I will then try and moderate and look at the chat to see if there's some other questions that we would all collectively benefit from. So I'd also encourage if there's panelists or others here who can answer some of the speakers' questions, or the panelists have additional information, please feel free. I might first start with Michelle from GECA and GenTO, long-standing colleague and contributor to eco-labels from Singapore Environment Council. So I'm keen to hear from you both. How do you see the eco-labels assisting government to reach these targets? We've got governments reaching quite specific needs under global commitments. And how do you both see eco-labels being part of that procurement solution? So I might throw to Michelle first.
Thanks, Kate. Yeah, I think there are a few ways, and I think as Jorge mentioned, it's really key to have that simplified baseline so that we can achieve those climate objectives. It's key and really important to have that harmonisation on standards across countries. Ensure that there is consistency and standards and that there are benchmarks. If we're able to streamline product recognition, it can facilitate trade from country to country, and it can support governments in making those easier choices. There was also a point, I think, that Jorge said that it is confusing. There are a lot of labels out there. So how do governments know which labels to pick and which labels to utilise? So the harmonisation part of our sort of MOU is really to ensure that there is that core criteria, to ensure that we've got similar goals, we've got aligned requirements, and that we're targeting the climate issues, the global problems. And as you say, it is a global problem, but it is a global issue that we need to resolve. I think you said as well, Kate, about a collective movement. It is working together to ensure that there is consistency. It's working to ensure that we're providing clear information for people to be able to sort of look at a product, or procurement officers to be able to look at a product and say, yeah, that ticks the requirements that we need, not just for carbon reduction, but also for biodiversity impacts. Also ensuring that, you know, that product is designed for disassembly so that it can be recycled. So all of the issues from a circular economy, from biodiversity to carbon, need to be sort of aligned and easy to understand. You know, when I came into GECA, I think it was like, gosh, there's so much to sort of grab and grasp in this space and in this area. How do we make that sort of easier and more understandable? Secondly, you know, utilising accreditation agencies, it's really important to use those third-party verifiers. You need to ensure that products are certified to certain standards, that those standards are reputable standards. Again, talking about the amount of labels that are out there, how do we define what reputable standards are? How do we know where to look? Both SEC and us at GECA are very lucky to be part of the Gen Network and both Genesis members, which is something that we're superiorly proud of. And basically, we want to put ourselves into the position of being verified. We want to confirm that we're doing the right thing. And again, going back to the core criteria and that consistency and that aligned requirements, we're ensuring that we're getting even more aligned, and we're ensuring that we're sort of working together so that when governments or anyone is looking for sort of sustainable products, it's easy to understand. Greenwashing, I think Catherine mentioned about greenwashing already, and I'm surprised we haven't heard that word sort of 15 times already, but we do know that there's a lot of greenwashing right now. And greenwashing often comes out of the marketing departments, and it's often not out of an intent to do something wrong. It's out of a lack of knowledge. It's out of a lack of understanding and ensuring that those claims that are being made are credible. So again, the eco labels are ensuring that those claims are credible and that they can be verified. Again, popping back to how do we ensure that we are credible organisations? There are now many green building associations. You know, we've got GBCA here in Australia, ISC, WELL, LEED, US EPA. You know, I think another one comes across, I come across another one all the time. So it's, how do we streamline, or how can eco labels streamline into recognition for these green building schemes? And many of our standards are recognised by green building schemes externally. So again, it supports that sort of drive when there is infrastructure, when there are buildings being created, when there is new infrastructure being built. And I can't remember that horrific figure that Jorge just mentioned, but there's a lot of money going into it. So how do we make sure that we're able to slot in and work with those schemes so that it can be recognised? I think the third point is probably consumer adoption and the actual cost of green products. And Catherine mentioned the value for money being a procurement sort of requirement within government. I think first and foremost, and I was really glad to hear that we're all looking at other impacts. It's not just about the cost, you know, it's about the cost of it on its throughout its entire life cycle. You know, it is really not just about the cost. And I know that sustainable products, to become a credible and certified product, costs money. And I know that organizations pay to have their products certified so that they can show and demonstrate transparently that their product is sustainable. So how do we work to reduce the cost of sustainable products? How can we make that a more accessible and less expensive option for people to make? And when we break it down to a per piece cost, the per piece is not a significant amount. It's, you know, again, it's that mindset. It's not just about the value of the money, it's about what else it's looking at. But what can we do to drive those costs down? And that really is demand. So the more products that are picked up, the more people that choose to use sustainable products, the less the cost is going to be. So how do we now engage with an actually enthused audience? There's been lots of reports and there's lots of information about consumers choosing sustainable products. You know, people want to have that uptake of products that are more environmentally friendly, more environmentally and social. You know, social impacts are really important as well. So if we're able to drive that consumer demand and drive that brand awareness using reputable labels to verify products' environmental and social impact credentials, then are we going to drive down that cost? So we really need to work on those awareness campaigns. And we at GECA have been lucky to be also partnered with some very forward-facing organisations that have a wider reach. We are, again, a small team at GECA, so how do we utilise the partners? And I call our licensees the partners because they really are our partners, because it's up to all of us to drive that message, to promote the benefits of environmental products and eco-labels such as our eco-labels. So we utilise them. And just sort of finally, you know, it's not just about driving awareness through consumers. It's about industry making a change. It's about industry innovating and looking for better processes. It's about government. It's about government putting these in their procurement policies, ensuring that there is a more defined procurement guideline as to what we should be looking for. Manufacturers making different choices, individuals making better choices. We all need to work together to make those better choices. Just to, before I go, I think ultimately it's a bit of a weird one, because from a GECA perspective, our ultimate goal is that you don't need eco-labels, that everyone would be doing the right thing. So my drive, or our ambition, is to put ourselves out of a job because everybody makes the right choices and everybody does the right things. I think that's it.
Thanks, Michelle. Really useful. And I think there's some questions in the chat around the cost, and you know, if we've got time, we can answer to that. But I think what you raised also is what's the cost of not doing it. In reality, we will hear from our licensees as well. There are certainly some efficiencies that come from the processes, but we'll throw that to our manufacturers in a minute. But first, we'll go to Ms. Jen Teo to hear from your perspective. Just looking for an unmute there. It's tricky, isn't it, sometimes?
Okay.
There you go.
Okay, there you go. Well, thank you very much, Kate and all. I think all of us have heard enough about standards and harmonization and transparency. I'll try to go another angle, and that's really how the public sector in leading the way on environmental sustainability and making the commitment to achieve net zero will truly help us to accelerate our efforts on green procurement. So notwithstanding, both the eco-labeling and green procurement have increasingly been recognized as synonymous to each other, not just from the public sector, but also from the businesses as policy instruments with great potential to steer product innovation and purchasing decisions, and to realize its contribution towards sustainability goals and ambitious net zero targets. So to that end, we're really happy that it's fortuitous and great timing that just 2 weeks ago, the Ministry of Sustainability and Environment in Singapore, through the Committees of Supply, had announced 3 areas with which the public sector has committed to achieve net zero emissions around 2045. Just 5 years ahead of our national target. So one of it is the annual greengov.sg report on government efforts, progress and plans. Secondly, the statutory boards to publish annual environmental sustainability disclosures on their efforts, progress and plans. And thirdly, up to 5% evaluation points to be set aside for environmental sustainability for large government construction and ICT tenders starting in 2024. So what this means to us truly is that we've been talking a lot about harmonization of standards, ensuring transparency, truth and trust, with Michelle had put it so correctly, through the processes that we approach on certification. This helps us to fuel the way in how we speak to the private sector to get them on board the certification and to ensure that the processes that we introduce to our certification are true to what we approach it to be through the Type 1 eco-labeling standards. So to this end, then what this means is that with governments having a great significant influence on industries which are heavily dependent on public spending, especially in transportation sector, the built sector, management services, construction, industrial products and utilities, it would mean that it sets us up between GECA and SEC to be able to harmonize, not just in terms of the eco-label standards, but also harmonizing the way which we should go forward in evaluating these standards, as well as the product categories that would serve the public procurement roadmap. So to this end, for a start, in our joint roadmap between GECA and SEC, we have started creating a joint technical advisory group comprising of AU and SG experts and industry representatives to agree and develop standards that will support short and long-term objectives and that will contribute to the Sustainable Development Goals. So what this means to us is that besides just harmonizing on standards to ensure the mutual recognition of these standards so that we can facilitate the trade flows between the countries, it also ensures that the products that we agree to harmonize and enable trade would also support not just the private sector in terms of supply, but also demand from the government. So this, the disclosure, the statutory boards who are now obligated to publish the annual sustainability disclosures on the efforts, does help us to accelerate and make that mindset shift towards the industries as well as the consumers to ensure that whatever they hold true in their practices will indeed be expressed through the product certification. So this is what I wanted to put across to everyone in terms of the importance of not just how we should be harmonizing our standards, but the disclosures, the mandates that is set by the government to the within the public sector around achieving the net zero emissions by 2045, and the requirements for disclosures would certainly help us to mandate these requirements across the certification schemes in both countries. Thank you, Kate.
Thanks, Jen, and thanks, Michelle. So look, there's a few questions in the chat. I've seen good and bad manufacturing everywhere around the world, I've got to say, and some excellence. That we have leaders and laggards, but I know today we have two leaders who are licensees and involved in eco-labelling. So we have Karina Clark from Planex here in Australia, so a big welcome, and also Jester Cruz from EFSON, to really perhaps answer some of the questions we're hearing around, you know, how long does it take? Isn't it costly? But really what I'd like to acknowledge about these speakers here is actually the leadership and the commitment to going, you know, I'm doing the right thing, and a moral, ethical decision making around manufacturing. And indeed, manufacturers are a significant component of this whole solution. So I'd like to open up to Karina and Jester. A big welcome. I'm keen to hear, let's start with you, Karina, just around why did you decide to certify with eco-labels, and how has that helped you and differentiate you in the market?
Thanks, Kate. We decided to, well, it was actually PlanX's driven business value proposition is to do no harm to our people, to our stakeholders, and to the environment. And that's driven at the top through the director, Jean-Pierre, who has been leading PlanX's drive from a sustainable point of view for many years now. We're 50 years in manufacturing of sheet metal storage solutions. So we saw a need for, we certainly believed in what we were doing, but we saw a need for third-party verification and certification to assure our architects and designers who are specifying us and their clients that our product was of the highest quality and met all of the needs. And we joined, our first certification was back in 2006. So we've been doing this for many years now. And the process is rigorous, it's time consuming, and it's not cheap, but it is well worth having that there, and has stood us in good stead in terms of government procurement over many years. I would suggest that we work with federal government and state government and in the education sector primarily. And we have been, we realise that it's a very important part of our business proposition, and it is effective to a point in getting us work and procurement. However, there is a but in there, in that often the way that the industry is set up is that you can be specified, but when a builder or a developer takes on a contract, you can lose out on that project in regards to cost. So I think there's a lot of work still to be done in this space in terms of increasing the value of our eco-label system and bringing it up to being worth more than, put it this way, the dollar is one thing, but we've really got to sort of step up and realise that the world that we're living in needs to have a greater sense of value about our sustainable processes. And we've recently redone our website and sustainability and all of the processes from design for disassembly, the choices of materials, the fact that we choose near sourcing of all of our materials, and choose to manufacture locally in Australia, so there's less impact in terms of greenhouse gas emissions and transport costs. All of that is has an impact that I think it needs to be recognised, and I question sometimes how, when it gets to that bottom line of builders and developers, what they really see at the end of the day. What else? I think that our materials, 94 to 99% of our materials is sheet steel, which is all Australian, choosing BlueScope sheet steel. And out of that, its recycled content is 24%. And the fact that that component is all recyclable, 100% recyclable, I think leaves us in good state in terms of looking at doing no harm to the environment because of the nature of the materiality. So yeah, eco labels are important, but I think we've got some way to go in terms of increasing the value of the label itself.
Thanks, Karina. And it does take a whole ecosystem, doesn't it? And yeah, and I, you know, perhaps to share a slight gruesome story, but something that comes back to me is, you know, having worked with some licensees who were procured in a particular project, and unfortunately, primary school furniture, unfortunately, all these children were losing the tips of their fingers from the bottom of the chair. And when they came back to see and complain to the manufacturer, of course, it was cheap substitution, not certified at all, and quite a differential. And sadly, it took quite a lot of harm to children to understand that actually there is sometimes a reason that you want good quality products and furniture and really critical considerations. So again, I think some of those costs and considerations of really understanding specification and why we do that and following it right through to the end. And I'm hearing that from some of the challenges that you experience as in the manufacturer licensee end. So really do your own due diligence if you're procuring as well, to ask yourself, you know, why and what is the difference actually beyond the financial. So thanks, Karina. Jester, keen to hear about your experiences as well and what you're seeing in that space of certification as a manufacturer.
Thanks, Kate, and to Ms. Jen, SEC, and the rest of the GECA team, again, for giving us the opportunity to share our experience to the people on the call. So now I think for Epson, right, the benefits of green labels has been truly significant. Sustainability is actually a key direction of Epson. So in our mid to long-term plans. So the way Epson do business is actually deeply entrenched in our philosophy to actually enrich lives and help create a better world. So sustainability for us is actually not just a program, it is who we are as a company. So one of the main actions that we are doing towards sustainability is to actually create products that can help other companies become sustainable themselves. So for us, partnering with SEC's Green Label actually is a very easy decision to make. The reality is, unfortunately, a vast majority of our customers, whether it be consumers or B2B businesses, sustainability awareness is still an issue. However, the trend is promising and encouraging, but the reality is a big portion actually still needs a lot of education. So eco-labeling now becomes, for us, it becomes key because it allows the market to understand and have them, you know, be given this opportunity to be able to purchase sustainable products. So I think if given the right education and the choices available, you know, I think the market will choose the more sustainable option. So eco-labeling, I think, accelerates this understanding. So in the case of Epson, I think for the Singapore market, we are already in this journey, I think, for past 4 years since having our products eco-labeled. And then in the 4 years of being able, you know, to promote our own products, which has been very beneficial for us, of course. We also realized that we should also promote the green labeling itself. We should together with SEC. So it becomes not just an for us an individual effort just of SEC, but it becomes a community effort to promote green labeling in the region. Thank you.
Thanks, Jester. And Karina spoke to it as well, but just from your perspective around how else it's helped in terms of procurement, whether that's government or otherwise, but that large scalable, what you're seeing as a trend from your perspective. Can I throw to you, Jester? Are you seeing much government procurement on that?
Hello, Kate. Yes, sorry. Yep. I think depends on the country in the region. So in our case, we're managing Southeast Asia, and I think Singapore is way ahead in terms of this. So I think the having government purchasing practices be changed by such rules and legislation is now very apparent in Singapore. I'm hearing a few in Thailand and in Indonesia as well. So for us being because for Epson we do a lot of government tenders as well, and their products being the more sustainable option, but not the cheapest option, I would say. Not the cheapest option. This really helps us. Yes.
Thanks, Jester. And something that came out very strongly from both you and Karina, I think, is the values. It's actually something quite fundamental to all that you do and that broader level of care. So I would like to acknowledge you and thank you for that. And, you know, we also have many systems and procurement looking for meaningful solutions, and without people like yourselves, that would be a lot more tricky. So thank you both. I might now just touch base with Jorge, if you're still there, noting the time. I'm interested in, you know, we've heard from Singapore and Australia in terms of public procurement, but also the global movement. So you touched on some of the other countries all doing that and regional. And I know that we've been doing support and training with ILO and World Bank and looking at those larger intergovernmental solutions as well. But just keen to hear from you what you're seeing in that global sense and what are the challenges and benefits. And you spoke to some of that earlier, but just responding to what we've progressed in our conversation.
Perhaps the most inspiring part here it is how can we widen the network of sustainable public procurement practitioners to bring businesses on board? What I have heard, Karina, other presenters here, it is that the greater interaction between industries and networks of sustainable public procurers will help redesign products. In many cases, the gap that we are seeing in sustainable public procurement are twofold. The products are not available or are not at a competitive stage, and therefore impacting the design phase of products and services is absolutely key. And for that, businesses need information. Businesses need awareness. Businesses need understanding of the trends to make the investment. The second one, it is, you've already spoke about it, and I'm very happy to have heard the word and the commitment of public and private actors to fight greenwashing. It is reducing the number of standards. Today, we are taking a little but very important step in the right direction. The third element that I see here, and it is something that often comes in my conversation with ministries of environment, it is or ministries responsible for procurement processes. The biggest challenge it is that there are competing demands. So one has, for example, to reconcile social needs in the procurement decisions. I remember very well the case of one specific government that had faced a number of regulations in which, taking into account indigenous communities, for example, capacity to provide values and very important practices, taking into account gender considerations, taking into account climate considerations. So really, we need to bring all the pieces together, not only the environmental case, the circularity case, but with social criteria to simplify the work of procurers, right? And I think that it's a greater opportunity, great that we have at this stage to really, in the work that we do in harmonization, in understanding of circularity aspects, to bring a social dimension so as to be able to have consistent methodologies that address climate objectives, that address nature objectives, but also do so from a very conscious gender and specific groups that we want to target, particularly disadvantaged groups. So I think that that is very much of an important frontier, because governments are confronted with reduced income, reduced resources, greater needs in terms of purchasing choices that need to be made, and really bringing value for money. So I do understand. I do understand the cases. Last point that I want to make, that it's also inspiring, is that in advancing in procurement practices, in addressing a specific value chains, we are seeing great change. The case of sustainable tourism, it is very inspiring. Together with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, we've launched the Global Tourism Plastic Initiative. What this is doing, it is to help destinations, but most specifically companies that want to make a commitment to reduce or to phase out the use of plastics, not only single plastics in their operations and facilities, a reality. In many cases, we are really talking about small and medium enterprises that require understanding of the processes. They require simplified checklists on how can they measure their plastic waste, simplified checklist on solutions that they can just use because they can't afford expensive consultancies. And it is there in which this beautiful partnership, the Global Tourism Plastic Initiative under the Sustainable Tourism Program of the One Planet Network, is providing great results for small, medium enterprises, large enterprises, and greater impact. So going at the level of specific value chains, specific sectors, and this is why I am pleased that this MOU starts to focus on buildings and construction, look at specific materials so as to build those alternatives, and working also on the product economy, looking at a specific product so as to get into more granularity. So that is what I would have to offer at this stage. Very, very pleased to hear this panel discussion.
Thank you, Jorge. You've raised some good points there too. And I have to say, my motto in Ecolabel Land tended to be ask and you shall receive. You know, the power of procurement really is moving markets. And so, you know, the more we can look at that, then the easier it's going to be, and the barriers will indeed lower. So thanks, Jorge, I appreciate that. We might go back to our government leads now with Catherine and Ms. Koh as well, just to look at, in terms of your perspectives, what you've heard from the rest of this panel too, in terms of your thoughts. How can we move forward from here in terms of how can eco-labels better be utilised in public procurement, from what you see on the ground and from what you've heard here today, and maybe how do we even educate and support to enable that further? Might start with you, Catherine.
Thanks, Kate. Lots going through my head at the moment. I just wanted to kind of jump back to Jorge's point around the different elements and, you know, the different requirements that are needed to be considered in government procurement. So we have a number of different, what we call procurement connected policies, and focusing on different aspects. So some have more of a social kind of sustainability element to it. Some have more of an economic sustainability element. So, you know, we've got an Indigenous procurement policy, we've got a policy around gender equality, we've got policy around Black economy and that shadow economy. Then we've got the environmental sustainability considerations within the Commonwealth procurement rules. So there's a lot that procurement officers are needing to kind of consider in their procurements. And I think part of the issue is we forget that sustainable procurement is actually the three elements of social, economic and environmental, and that they're not mutually exclusive. And we kind of look at an individual policy, but we forget that, you know, you can procure from an Indigenous company, but they might be using recycled content within the manufacturer. They might have a take back scheme. So these aren't mutually exclusive, and I think we need to get better at explaining that and supporting procurement officers to understand that. So there is definitely a willingness within, from my experience, within procurement officials to actually look at sustainability, but it's understanding how. And I think it's giving more information around how eco-labels can support that and look at those multiple objectives. I think that's really critical to help support procurement officers who are working to really tight timeframes, who are working within budget constraints, who have got multiple government policies that they need to meet, and really demonstrate how eco-labels can support that. So I think that's a really critical piece.
Yeah, thanks, Catherine. I really agree, and I think it's important to acknowledge that complexity. And of course, in Australia, you've got the modern slavery reporting as well. Yep. So that social component is really critical. I know GECA incorporates that too, but it is quite complex on the procurement side as well. So a very good pick up there. Ms. Koh, over to you.
Yeah. So how, I think the question was on how eco-labels can be utilized in public procurement. So in my earlier sharing, I shared that there were various considerations. I think even within the chat, I think there were several comments on, why should we adopt eco-labels? So I just wanted to just address this question, because I think for Singapore government, when we're considering eco-labels, we look at whether there are enough products carrying the label as well as the cost of compliance, right? And it might be a bit of a chicken-egg question, because some might ask, if I don't know whether there's demand for this label, why should I adopt it? And besides, this also comes at a cost. I need to know whether my investment is worth it. So I think governments can play a role in this by leading demand to provide some sort of assurance to suppliers. And for that to happen, I think governments as well as need to work with industry players to align the standards and make sure that this demand can be met by supply. But also, I think the truth of the matter is that there's always a lag time for supply to meet the demand. So in terms of implementation, from a government perspective, the government what Singapore government tries to do is to signal our intention so that suppliers can prepare to meet our demand. So for example, earlier I shared that we intend to recognize suppliers' practices also, and we have announced this ahead of time so that suppliers have time to build the necessary capabilities. Yeah. I think there were also concerns about the returns of investment, right? I think, Kate, you responded in the chat that actually there are quick ROIs, right? And you can achieve economies of scale. And I think for that to happen, I wanted to add on to what the panelists echo the thoughts of the panel about the importance of harmonization of standards, right? Because when we harmonize, then one company with the eco label can gain access to so much more markets. But also, I wanted to add on that I think we shouldn't let perfect be the enemy of good, because while harmonization is key, as we have established, different governments, different companies have various priorities. So maybe I think just one thought would be perhaps we could have of course, we still must have a common set of criteria, but I think the different organizations can then come in to say that, okay, this is what we're prioritizing at this moment, but along the way, we'll continue improving so that eventually we have perfect harmonization. Yeah.
Thank
you.
Can
I jump in there?
Oh, of course, go for it. Go for it, Catherine.
No, I totally agree. I think we need to have more conversations with suppliers as well, and be much clearer in what we're looking for. Give the market time to adapt, to understand what outcomes we're actually trying to achieve, so that they can then adapt and work with us. I think we don't allow enough time up front in planning, and research shows that 80% of a sustainability impact is decided at that design phase, and so there's more opportunities to work with suppliers much earlier. So I absolutely agree.
Okay, can I just add a few remarks here? Thank you so much. I think you've done a fantastic job in moderating very tough subject matter, and a lot of chat as well. I'm seeing the flow keep flowing in because there's a lot of concerns. But one of the people that should be in this call isn't on this call, but maybe in future webinars, is this organization called the Consumer Association International. It's a global association, Consumer Action International. Jorge, to your point, in terms of public procurement, no doubt this is the platform, and there's always this discussion about cost of going green. And we really need to have the alignment with consumer actions. And in SEC in Singapore, these are some of the learnings, maybe we can transfer over to Australia, is that we have actually always aligned some of our products and our green labeling to consumer actions. So they take action if there are two things. There were a lot of questions, again, on the column concerning false eco-labels, and they do the policing around the world, by the way, not just Singapore, for us. And number two, they also have a committee that is related to businesses. So it's businesses, supply chain, as well as government procurement, as well as touch points in consumer markets, whether it's supermarkets, etc. I just want to make that point. Sorry, Kate, to interject here, while the governments are speaking of public procurement, because the chat is just very busy around all of this. Thank you.
Don't be sorry, because we were about to throw to you anyway. So we're just admiring your intuitive jumping in. So I might actually throw to you one other point, because I think a beautiful summary, and what I'm also very much hearing, and also in the chat, is we are better together. And Catherine and Ms. Coe spoke about that too. Like, it's not just eco-labels and manufacturers. Like, I've referred to the whole ecosystem a few times today, but we need to keep deep listening to Jen, our members, our manufacturers, our procurers. Like, we all need to understand that we are better together and finding that roadmap, because we do need to be effective. And so I also liked the comment around being good, not perfect, because perfect's not going to get us there in the time we need either. So Isabella, I'm just keen to hear a little bit, I guess, more from that. There was a comment too in the chat around one eco-label. Why don't we just have one eco-label in the whole world? That would solve our problem. Rather than this regional cooperation and harmonization. I think you and I know how complex it is. So I'm interested from your perspective about what that could look like, but also would like you to respond to what are the next steps in deepening that ecosystem, working with our partners in order to maybe not achieve one eco-label in the world, but maybe we'll get there in the next decade, but to really progress meaningfully those responses.
Oh, that's really a loaded question, Kate, that you've given me. But, I would like to reference Jen, because I think Jen is closer to the ground in terms of that. And I will, come in and talk about the more global situation. Over to you, Jen, to answer this question.
Apologies, I didn't mean for it to be loaded, but it probably was. Well, look, I think I spoke to it briefly around genesis and the importance of harmonization, but this is a celebration, of course, too, between Singapore and Australia, and we do need to have that regional cooperation. There's other models of that too. And how do we have that as a proof of concept and scale and up and out? There was a comment in the chat around, can I certify something in Australia and take it to the US? We are all working together through our members at GEN in order to optimize those relationships. So, for instance, you'll see there's US EPA, there's recognition of certain certifications of GECA too. So your answer is yes, no more cost, but the more we can do that in terms of across our economies and looking at trade opportunities, the better we will be in regards to harmonization. But it's also not easy, and we do need to be able to, and I know Jorge would know this, we do need to be able to work with and at the cultural context, environmental context, economic context of regions all around the world, and not leave anyone behind. We talked about people as well in this, and we do need to, we are better together, which means we need to bring everyone along as well. So what does that look like? So harmonization, harmonisation of standards, bilateral harmonisation, regional, and we've got fantastic models there with the EU FLAR as our members. You've got Nordic Swan with 6 countries, and really critical examples of harmonisation. And of course, we see this significant step today with Singapore and Australia. So we are working at it from a GEN perspective. Our members sign up to an MOU and look to have efficient solutions for standards, verification, equivalence, in order to understand that manufacturers do need multiple region solutions. But there's more to do. And I often talk about, you know, one global eco-label would have to look at what good looks like and have an agreement on that. So we're in conversations, for instance, with the B20 at the moment, and looking at, you know, how to develop and scale common core criteria through GEN as well, to benefit all our manufacturers and our procurers, and indeed, as Michelle said, a global challenge and a global opportunity for us all. So I thank you all, particularly our panelists. They're the end of the formal questions. We've probably got a couple of minutes to just check the chat. I did talk about the one eco-label. One of the other questions that came up was just around, and we've all referred to it, but just is how to reduce the cost, or what is the best way of us being better together and reducing cost, and the component of, as Catherine said, all aspects of sustainability, including economic, noting that there's ESG drivers, but how do we do that together? So what's the best way? What's our next step from your perspective of how we drop the cost and make it a more effective and economic solution to use eco-labels? Just any one of the panel can jump in and share some last thoughts.
I think driving the costs down is the demand part again. You know, if we are working together and we're collaborating together, it gives us that opportunity to have a wider reach, for one, but it also gives us that opportunity to, if we are harmonising standards, we do have that core criterion, and to the one eco-label, global eco-label, you know, there's core criteria, there are benchmarks, and there's one eco-label, and I think they're all very different things. You know, core criteria is very important to have very similar criteria and similar sort of requirements. Benchmarks are there to set a goal and to make sure that we're achieving the bare minimum. You know, we also don't want to set too high a benchmarks that can't be achieved, which means, again, there won't be the uptake of eco-labels. And I think as we work towards those solutions, it will be easier to streamline into leads and wells and US EPAs, and therefore will reduce the cost. You won't need to get eco-label certification in Singapore and in Australia. You can do that certification or that assessment process once. So it will end up sort of driving the costs down, and of course demand. It's just demand, get people to take up and really build that awareness.
Well said. Thanks, Michelle. Anyone else?
I can just jump in and echo Michelle. One of the biggest issues that everyone will be asking for is the reduction of cost always, but without looking at the correct lens. And some of the costs that they would need to put in on another part of the equation has to do with audits and various other things that they have to come in, you know, and they shouldn't be looking at that. They should be looking solely right now, going forward, future ready, as the company will continue to have barriers, green barriers, that will come up with various other countries that are adopting public procurement policies or trade policies that require green initiatives. So especially in the building and construction area, more and more green barriers are coming up. So this should not be a conversation for that segment, I would say. Thank you.
And the cost of inaction, just to add that one last point.
Thanks, Michelle. That was my summary point there, the cost of not doing and how we quantify that as part of our data and decision making as well. Any last comments from the panel before we close? No, I think we're good. And any last call for questions from the panel? I'll put a call out in the chat. I think we've covered a lot of what was in the chat, but if anyone would like to pop on and come off mute, we've probably got time for just one last quick question before we close.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Right, Suzanne Little here. I was associated with GECA when it was first formed. One of the concepts that I thought was important in those early days, but it hasn't really, I haven't heard it today, for example, is the idea of moving on from consumerism to being a customer of another company. If someone produces a product, you are their customer, you are not a consumer of their product. And that distinction between customer and consumer is an ideological one that has not really, it's not in anyone's mindset. And I've found that without that jump, without realizing that consuming and continuing to consume is a problem, then it'll be very difficult for people to even want to take up eco-labelling or to buy products that have got eco-labels.
Thanks, Suzanne. Does anyone want to respond to that from the panel?
I'm happy to.
And that was going to be my apologies. That was going to be my take-home message, in a way, that there is a greater need to work on with partnership with the consumer information agenda. And perhaps the word that we're using increasingly, it's also about behaviors, right? It's how do we change the perception only of consuming to actually behaviors and satisfying needs. And that is one of the most important challenges that we're seeing, that particularly, for example, in the topic that you're discussing today, it's buildings and construction. Moving from materials that are required for buildings and construction to actually provision of shelter and adequate shelter. Doing so in a manner that it's inclusive, in a manner that it's efficient, and in a manner that it overall reduces the intensity of the material use in products. This shift of mindset, it's extremely important, and it is an area in which working together, consumer information programs and sustainable public procurement programs and initiative can, as a matter of fact, help drive transformation in lifestyles and behaviors agendas, right? And I was very pleased to hear comments from both Singapore and Australia government officials on how they are, in fact, reconciling these needs and how there is a better need to communicate them so as to shift business models, shift industry models, and overall promote greater innovation. So I do agree. Perhaps the term is not, and consumer reduces the individuality of the choices that are made, but overall the greatest challenges that we have today, it is using these choice editing policies. Procurement is one, as a matter of fact. We want to make sustainable choices, to make sustainable behaviors the norm. That is the way to reduce. I would say it's in the IPCC, the latest global assessments. There's so much that can be done through direct intervention and through industry models. Behaviors has also an important role to play in North and South, of course. A complex discussion maybe for another panel, but I was very pleased and really thank all of you. From my perspective, I just want to say thank you.
Yeah, so thank you, Jorge. I just wanted to echo what you just shared, to the point that Michelle, yourself and Kate, you made about bringing together the ecosystem. Very often, little is not enough is explained to the consumer the value of the green label. So to this point, what SEC also does with consumer outreach is to campaign and talk about, what a green label, what a good green label is all about. The ton of green labels out there, eco label, whatever they call it. But what is truly expressing or expressing the practices of businesses? So I think we need to do a better job of pushing our voice out there to the consumers to ensure that they know the value of these green labels, what we do in the supply chain, how we talk about circularity principles to drive resource efficiency, and also especially the chemical and pollutive substances, hazardous and toxic substances that we ensure meet safety standards in the whole certification process. So I think that's the piece that we need to call out in order that we proliferate the demand of the green label certified products going forward.
Thank you, both Jorge and Michelle and Jen. I think that's a lovely place to end, and a call to action for us all, acknowledging our role in this ecosystem and the fact that we are better together. And there's more to do. There's deep listening and lots of opportunities. So please, I would like to firstly thank all of our panelists and speakers today who really added a rich conversation and exploration to this topic. And I would personally like to also congratulate Singapore Environment Council and GECA on really expanding and taking one of those leadership steps in regional cooperation. So a big thank you from me. I encourage us all to thank the panel as well for their contribution.
Thank you, Ms. Harris. And with that, we've come to the end of the SEC-GECA webinar. We'd like to thank the many speakers and panelists who took time out of their busy schedules to be with us today. To all the attendees, we hope you've enjoyed the discussion and walked away with valuable knowledge of eco-labels both in Singapore and Australia. And thank you for being here, and have a nice day.
Thank you.